My teenage daughter secretly filmed me cheating on my husband and told him, and our family was shattered as a result. Molly Jacobs is an average 15-year-old girl. Her mom is always trying to micromanage Molly's life, dictating what she should and shouldn't do, disliking her friends, and even criticizing her fashion choices. Essentially, Linda is a control freak who never really listens to Molly, neglects to ask about her hobbies or school, and turns a blind eye to Molly's closest friends. Even though Linda intends to guide Molly to do what she thinks is best, their relationship suffers greatly. On the other hand, Molly's dad, Jim, who everyone calls Jimmy, possesses an unwavering calmness, and he learns early on not to sweat the small stuff. Jimmy actively encourages Molly to embrace her individuality, and he avoids bullying like lies or oversights as long as they don't harm himself or others. Whether it's dyeing her hair blue or getting her nose pierced, Jimmy is supportive, and even signs permission slips. He emphasized the importance of expressing emotions openly, being forthright, and avoiding concealment. Molly, he would say that in life, secrets corrode your character, they always come out eventually, and the longer they are hidden, the more damage they cause. Despite his busy career, Jimmy made it a priority to attend Molly's soccer and softball games, as well as any school events she attended. In their limited time together, Molly recognizes that she has grown into an adult, and while his wife, Linda, occasionally attends, she often doesn't attend these outings. When Molly asked Linda about Uncle Dan's visits, Linda sometimes denied it, even though his truck was parked nearby. At other times Linda would explain Dan's presence as having to do with landscaping counseling, borrowing tools from Jimmy, or just checking in to see if Jimmy was home and chatting. 5:30 p.m. Shortly after lunch one day at about 12:30 p.m., she would always arrive home ahead of Jimmy, who arrived home between 6 p.m. Jimmy arrives home between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. Molly began to experience severe menstrual cramps, and in an effort to alleviate her symptoms, she asked her teacher to see the nurse and managed to convince the nurse to let her go home early. Although her attempts to reach her mother, Linda, by phone went unanswered, and she finally left a short voicemail explaining her situation and stating that unless Linda could come and get her she would be walking home, but Linda never returned her call. She heard strange noises upstairs and curiosity drove Molly quietly up the stairs to her parents' bedroom, where she rounded the doorframe and was shocked to see her mom, Linda, making out with Uncle Dan, both of them moaning. She looked around again. This time she had her cell phone and video camera with her. Linda and Dan didn't notice Molly as they continued to sluttily fuck me. You dirty boy, don't stop, she screamed. Dan responded, I love making love to you, I'll satisfy you better than little Jimmy. They laughed together, but this enraged Molly as Molly stormed into the room screaming, you're cheating, you worthless womanizing woman. How could you betray our family like this, your Uncle Dan sleeping with your own brother's wife? Both Dan and Linda were startled by Molly's sudden appearance and then looked around in horror. They both flinched in fear when they realized that Molly was filming and yelling at them. Molly stormed out of the room and ran down the stairs as Linda shouted, oh God, Molly, wait, please come back, it's not what it looks like, please, Molly, let's talk. We've got to find her, we've got to stop her from telling Jimmy, it's going to ruin him, he's going to get back at both of us. Oh God, what have I done? She sprinted across the yard as her cell phone rang. It was Linda. Molly ignored it and let it go to voicemail as she sprinted to the 9M Creek Nature Trail, where she and her dad used to walk and jog. There were 5 towering cottonwoods that were their favorite spot, known as our trees. Sometimes they would scramble to get there, huddled behind the trees. Molly cried, burying her head in her knees. How could her mom do this to her dad, to her, and to Uncle Dan, who had cheated on his brother, Jimmy, and his wife, tears streaming down her face. Linda made countless calls to Molly, but none of them were answered. Linda ignored the incoming calls, believing that it was most likely Jimmy, and she feared that her husband was interrupting their carnal time, even though she experienced guilt, lust, and arousal from the illicit excitement. She rationalizes her actions as personal indulgences and convinces herself that they will not harm Jimmy. It doesn't seem to have significantly damaged her marriage, but she fails to realize the emotional toll it has taken on her family, which may stem from guilt. She doesn't have time to dissect it all, and she's afraid to think deeply enough to understand why she gambled with her daughter, branded her a disgrace, and got away with it. She began to realize the far-reaching damage her actions had caused, including to herself, and she couldn't fathom how she'd allowed it to happen. Her love for Jimmy and Molly transcended everything, and she understood that the affair had meant the destruction of her marriage, but she'd found herself unable to resist the temptation of her secret desires, and now that she couldn't live with the possible repercussions on her family, she realized she'd broken the lives of the man and daughter she cherishes, as well as her own. She desperately tried to persuade Molly not to reveal to Jimmy what Molly had witnessed for fear that it would break Jimmy's heart. Despite Linda's efforts to persuade her, Molly would not listen to her, choosing instead to call her father. "Don't let Mom know until you get here and don't answer her calls. Please Molly, why did you and Linda have a big fight? Are you okay? What's going on? Come on Dad, hurry up, don't call Mom please. Come on, I'm fine but I really need you right now. Well, stay put and take care of yourself, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jimmy stormed out of the office, choosing not to waste any time explaining himself to Beth. He jumped out of the car and sprinted down the path in his formal attire to find Molly curled up in the bushes in a state of tears. He rushed to her side and Molly, what happened? He comforted her, stroking her hair and back until she gradually calmed down. Molly, did someone hurt you? What's wrong? Did you have a fight with your mom? Linda's calls kept coming in, and Molly already had 10 missed calls on her cell phone. You always talk about being loyal to your family and not keeping secrets that make you sleepy, but what if the truth would make things worse? What if the truth would destroy someone else? Jimmy gave her a puzzled look but got through to Linda's voicemail. Jimmy, we need to talk. Molly and I had a fight and she ran off and she's obviously very upset. I don't think she fully understands what she saw that upset her so much, and I'm trying to find her. Can you give me a call and let me know where she might be, or can you get her to call me? Jimmy, please know that I only love you and Molly and I'll always love you guys. But Jimmy put it aside and focused on Molly. She let out a sneer as she heard the message. "Now let me play my message." She played Linda's first voicemail message and Linda could be heard crying as she said, "Molly, it's not what you think it is. It doesn't make sense. It's just an innocent, senseless act." Molly said it was just an innocent act. Jimmy looked at she was about to ask, but Molly urged Dad to be patient. "But let me hear Mom's next voicemail." She pressed play, and Linda sounded pleading. "Molly, please talk to me. Don't tell anyone, especially your dad. It will tear him and our family apart." "Molly, you have to start at the beginning and explain everything." "Dad, are you sure?" Molly questioned. "You heard what she said, it would destroy our family, although I think Mom has already done that." Jimmy looked her in the eye and insisted, "Molly, you can't hide it any longer now. Let's get to the bottom of this, for God's sake. What really happened?" "I'm sorry, Dad, I wasn't feeling well at school, so I decided to come home and called Mom several times, but her cell phone was off, and when I got home, Uncle Dan's truck was parked in the driveway, and the front door was locked, so I came in on my own, and noticed that there was no one downstairs, and I heard voices in your bedroom, so I crept upstairs." She lowers her head to her knees and begins to cry softly. Jimmy plays the video. Molly's painful experience unfolds in vivid detail, and at the end she is inconsolable, and what she says to Linda and Dan jolts them out of their closeness, and the look on their faces at the sight of Molly is indescribable, first fading joy, and then shock, fear, shame, and anger. And in less than 5 seconds Jimmy turns off the phone. Jimmy turned off the phone, head down, tears streaming down his face. "God, how could she do this to us and to my brother? How could they betray and humiliate me like this?" But the receptionist told her that he had left suddenly to meet a client and wouldn't be back that day. She said she could take a message for her and suggested that Linda call him directly to make sure he knew she urgently needed to speak to him. "Linda, I hope Molly doesn't do anything reckless. I hope she doesn't spill her guts to Jimmy. You know he'll never forgive us for doing this. I think I should go home before Amanda finds out where I am. I'll just have to wait and see how this plays out. Damn it, how could we have been so stupid?" Linda struggled to speak. Her sobbing brought me home. "Dan, I need to figure out what to tell Molly. I have to get to her before Jimmy does. I need to get to her before Jimmy. I need to convince her that if she tells Jimmy our lives are over." She dialed Molly's number one more time and it came back to voicemail. She yelled into the phone, "Molly, I'm sorry, please understand I didn't say anything. It's all over. Please call me before you talk to anyone. Please don't tell Jimmy. It will destroy all of us." With those words Linda got out of the car and went back to the house. She tried to call Molly again but there was no answer. She hurried to the master bedroom, stripped off the sheets and put on fresh ones. This had become her routine every Wednesday since Dan had left. She didn't even particularly like Dan, and she certainly didn't love him. Her love for Jimmy had never wavered. Upon reflection, however, she recognized how she had begun to emotionally alienate herself from him and her daughter, why she was always blowing up at Molly, and when had she stopped communicating openly and affectionately with Jimmy? She pondered these questions deeply. What went wrong with me? He'd put Molly first, especially after his wife had emotionally pushed him away, and he knew there was a lack of intimacy between them. But when he'd suggested getting help, and Linda had insisted everything was fine, she'd seemed to think he'd emotionally withdrawn from her, and Jimmy hadn't seemed to need her anymore. Dan had complimented her on her seductive powers and the importance he placed on her, and he couldn't find the same kind of connection with his pregnant wife, Amanda, that he had found with Linda, whose pregnancy had meant that he'd had home with less attention. Dan's flattery and constant praise of her beauty had brought them together quickly. Now that Linda recalled the pain and betrayal evident on Molly's face, Molly had called her a cheap whore and Linda couldn't refute her opinion of Amanda. Dan and Jimmy's bonds and his parents. She collapsed on the bed and sobbed uncontrollably until she was exhausted. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Molly hovered by the tree, occasionally exchanging something through their tears. "I'm consumed with anger and hurt, betrayed not only by the woman I love so much, but by my own brother, my lifelong ally, and now that you've been caught up in this turmoil, I know our family will never be the same again. But she's your mother and you'll always need to have a relationship with her even if it's hard to grasp right now. Let's find a hotel room and get some rest and deal with the emotional issues tomorrow." Jimmy contacted his friend Jack Wilson, the city DA, and briefed him on the situation. He told Jack that Linda may file a missing persons report soon. He asked Jack to delay any action, because he knew Molly was safe with him and they'd reconnect soon enough. Jack reluctantly agreed, setting the deadline for Monday and urging Jimmy to talk to Linda before then. Molly and Jimmy ordered burgers and fries at the Hilton Hotel. PM Linda woke up with a start to find that neither Molly nor Jimmy had returned her calls. "Oh God, no," she panicked. "Jim must know or he would have by now contacted her or gone home. I need to explain myself. I don't know how Jimmy will react or what he wants to hear." She starts to make up her own story and prepares to face him. She waits until midnight hoping to get a call or a text, but no reply. Early in the morning, Jimmy and Molly woke up early and headed to the Hilton for breakfast. Jimmy informed the school that Molly would be absent for 2 days and told his workplace that he would be working remotely from his cell phone and computer, instructing them to contact him only in case of emergency. "I'm concerned that you now understand the importance of values such as loyalty, honesty, and sticking to your morals and ethics. From an adult point of view, you know that life is full of challenges, but it's important to stick to your own moral compass. Mom seems to have forgotten that, and when she was having an affair with your Uncle Daniel, the trust and betrayal that ensued can't be wiped away. I'm trying to figure out what to do next, and since we're all in this together, I'm going to want you to be at my side, to help me decide the future of our family. I'm going to call Dan right now and ask him some questions." Jimmy dialed Dan's number. Dan answered and said, "Go outside and leave Amanda alone, we just woke up," then quickly went downstairs and out onto the porch. Dan asked what was wrong, and Jimmy replied angrily, "What do you mean? Tell me honestly when and why you were with my wife." Dan paused for a moment and then said, "Jimmy, I'm really sorry. We had sex in the first place and we've been having sex ever since, but it wasn't because of you. There's no love or real interest between us, it's purely physical lust and excitement, and I regret it." "Jimmy, it doesn't make any sense to either of us. Have you talked to Linda? And you should be asking her these questions." Dan said, "I'm asking you, man, how long have you and Linda been together?" Dan replied hesitantly, "For the past 10 weeks. Jimmy has been coming over to your place every Wednesday." Jimmy yelled, "Why are you betraying me like this?" Dan explained, "It's not because of you, it just happened. Amanda and I weren't intimate because she was pregnant and I was attracted to Linda and it escalated to kissing, making out, and then finally sleeping together. And I'm not going to talk to you or see you ever again, and if I do talk to you you'd better run, because I'm gonna confront you. You're dead to me. I don't see you as a brother anymore." And despite Dank's pleas and apologies and pleas for Jimmy to understand and not let this destroy their relationship, "Do you understand how much this has hurt Molly? So don't say it doesn't matter. It shows that neither of you cared enough about us to spare us this pain." Jimmy ended the call, convinced that this was his last conversation with Daniel. On Thursday and Friday, Molly and Jimmy worked in their hotel room, eating in the restaurant and going out for fresh air on their breaks. Linda kept calling them, but they were ignoring her phone calls and voicemails, worrying and wondering how to get in touch with them. "LOL, my daughter is missing and I need to file a police report to find her," she told the officer at the counter, and after collecting details including her name, her daughter's name, her husband's name and address, the officer put her on hold. "Mrs. Jacobs, I'm a friend of your husband Jimmy. I wanted to let you know that Molly is fine, she's with Jimmy. He contacted me knowing that you might be filing a missing persons report. We agreed that I'd wait for him to contact you over the weekend before I made it official. Molly is safe with him, that's all I can say. He'll be in touch with you now. If he doesn't get in touch with you by Monday morning, call me and I'll intervene." He handed her his card and led her to the door. She felt his accusing stare and his disdain as he walked her out the door. Thinking that Jimmy had told him what happened and realizing that arguing wouldn't help, she walked to the car and sat down in the seat, letting the tears flow again. Molly replied, "No, Dad, I never want to talk to her again. I can't find any reason to forgive her for what she did, and I can't imagine that any apology would suffice. How can we be sure she is honest? We should go to her house, give her a chance to come clean about the affair, and then we'll make a decision, and we'll need more clothes and toiletries, and if we're going to be staying in a hotel, you've got school on Monday, so grab your backpacks and your books, and get ready, and it's Sunday, alright, so we'll go over to her house, get her side of the story, and then we'll decide if we're going to stay or if we're going to leave with our stuff. And they'll find Linda sitting there sipping her coffee, and staring at her cup, and they'll see that she's not going to stay. She looked much older since they'd last seen her, her swollen face dotted with red marks, tear tracks marring her partially removed eye makeup, her hair disheveled and unwashed. She leapt up from her seat and rushed towards Molly wanting a hug, but Molly pushed her away avoiding contact and went around to the other side with Jimmy following close behind Linda. We're here to talk about what happened and why it happened. You've caused us both a great deal of pain and our love and trust in you is shattered. I'm really sorry, please understand that this has nothing to do with you two. I love you more than anything and I don't want to lose you, Jimmy. It was a mistake, it didn't mean anything, it only happened once and it won't happen again. Can't we work this out and not end our marriage because of a mistake and a meaningless encounter? She turned around, and as soon as she turned around she saw Jimmy angrily saying to Molly, I think we'll go with plan B. Molly left the kitchen to go gather her things and get her backpack. As soon as Molly walked out of the room, Jimmy turned around and interrupted Linda. I talked to Dan. I know this has been going on for 10 weeks. I even saw the video of you cheating on me with him, and in the process you humiliated me. So who's lying, you or Dan? Don't tell me that our marriage was ruined because of one mistake. It wasn't just one mistake, it was an ongoing affair. You wouldn't have ended it if Molly hadn't caught you. All you cared about was getting caught. You betrayed and disrespected our family to the point where you did this in bed with my brother. Jimmy rushed upstairs to the bedroom and Linda collapsed on the floor crying. She had hoped to sway him by lying about the length of the affair and persuade him to forgive her, but his anger was unprecedented, and now she doubted any chance of reconciliation with her husband and daughter, dazed by the pain and anger caused by her betrayal. A few minutes later Molly and Jimmy walked down with their packed suitcases. Jimmy took off his wedding ring and placed it on the counter and the two left without a word. Linda Ray curled up on the kitchen floor and cried. Jimmy and Molly returned to the Hilton, but Jimmy began to look for an apartment near the school. In his office, he contacted the rental agency and rented a modern-style 2-bedroom apartment for a 6-month lease. The next morning, Jimmy took Molly to school, and when he returned, he began to move their few belongings into their new apartment. Later that day, his financial advisor told him that since he had set up a college fund for his daughter, he could put a significant portion of their joint savings and investments into a trust fund for her education and protection from any divorce settlement. Meanwhile, for the past 10 days, Linda has been contacting Molly and Jimmy by phone and text message, pleading with them to communicate, attend marriage counseling, and return home. Jimmy instructs the security guards at his office to prevent her from entering the office, and Molly locates the school's vice principal, explains the situation, and convinces them to bar Linda from the campus. Molly opted to contact Jimmy's parents to see if they had any updates. Knowing that it had been a long time since we had last met, they replied that they had nothing to report but were just awaiting the arrival of Dan and Amanda's children, and invited Linda, Jimmy and Molly to brunch the following weekend when Dan and Amanda were visiting Molly. It was then that Jimmy realized that the family had been kept in the dark. Linda had not revealed the truth to her parents, and Dan apparently had not informed Amanda or their parents. How could you do that, Jimmy? It's not at all like you left Linda over a disagreement about Molly's schoolwork. That's the way the two of you had always resolved issues before. Jimmy just explained that there were some personal matters between him and Linda that needed time to be resolved. Later that night, Jimmy's parents call and invite Linda, Jimmy and Dan over for brunch. Molly notices Jimmy's efforts to avoid accusations and realizes that neither Linda nor Dan are telling the truth, but her father shrugs and insists that things will work themselves out. 2 weeks later, after some introspection and discussion with Molly, Jimmy concludes that he can't forgive Linda for her betrayal, deception, and refusal to admit to breaking her wedding vows. Obviously, she took no responsibility, and neither did Dan. Jimmy decided to end it all and sent his attorney to serve Linda with divorce papers at home. Linda pondered how she could convince Jimmy and Molly to come back so she could mend their relationship. Even though she knew she'd hurt them, she carefully opened the door, identified herself, and handed her an 8x11-inch folder, and the young man announced, Mrs. Jacobs, you have been served, then quickly took a picture of her and the package and returned to his car. Confused by his words, Linda returned to the living room, sank into the couch, tore open the envelope, removed the papers, and choked back tears when she saw the divorce petition at the top of the first page. A few days after receiving the divorce petition, Jimmy found himself bombarded with phone calls from Linda and his own parents, all accusing him of ending his marriage over trivial differences, followed by a call from Dan's wife, Amanda, chastising him. Jimmy, how could you break off your relationship with Dan because of an instrumental argument and contemplate divorcing Linda because of something so trivial? They begin contacting Molly with the same pleas, urging her to come home to her distraught mother. Witness Jimmy's pain and the vilification of him by his family. Molly realizes that Dan is not revealing the truth, but is instead bringing his fight with Jimmy to Molly's attention. Linda tries to use all the family resources available in hopes of convincing Jimmy and Molly to come home. However, Molly is on the verge of a breakdown, and she opens her computer and writes an email to the entire family. "It is with deep pain that I send you the attached video, knowing that it will shock and hurt you as much as it did me when I walked into this nightmare and recorded it. Please watch this video and think about what you would do if you were in my father's shoes. Imagine being betrayed by two people you trusted, who loved and supported you unconditionally, only to lie to you in the worst way possible, continue to deny it, and refuse to take responsibility. Please watch the attached video privately, and then feel free to discuss with my mom and Uncle Dan how you think Dad should have responded." Linda missed her personal emails at work, and when she left the building into the parking lot, her cell phone stayed turned off. But then she realized she had missed calls from her parents, Amanda's and Jimmy's parents, and she listened to Amanda's voicemail first. "You are despicable. Your affair with Dan has not only ruined Jimmy's life, but mine as well. I will fully support Jimmy in his divorce. He has treated you with love and respect, and has given everything he has to his family, and you have ruined all of that with your disgraceful behavior." The next voice message was from her mother Linda. "How could you, Linda? It's disgusting and painful for me and Jimmy's brother to watch this video in your marital bed. Why did you do this?" Linda sat in the driver's seat, tears streaming down her face. Taking out her Apple phone, she reluctantly opened her email to find a message from Molly. Despite her reluctance, it wasn't just the content of the video that disturbed her, it was also Dan's voice, as he clearly repeated the acts. "Fuck me, you dirty boy, don't you dare stop." She screamed as Dan responded, "I love fucking you, I'll satisfy you better than little Jimmy." And of course there was Molly's pain, shock and anger as she screamed, "You're a liar, how could you betray our family like that?" Her attempts to get her family to help, to get Jimmy to talk to her, to get him to change his mind, were all gone, and all that flashed through her mind was more lies, more disrespect, and an unwillingness to admit that their behavior could be as harmful as the forbidden relationship itself. And she realized that she had only been fooling herself, that Jimmy wasn't going to turn back, that he was deeply offended, and that she understood that she had permanently severed any intimate bonds of love. She cried in the parking lot for an hour before mustering the strength to start her car and drive home. 3 weeks later, Jimmy's attorney called to tell her that he had scheduled a court hearing for 2 weeks from now because she had not signed or returned the divorce papers. He advised her to hire legal representation and prepare herself with the recommendation of a friend who had experienced infidelity and divorce. Linda found a divorce attorney who candidly disclosed her and Dan's behavior and how she got into this situation. After reviewing the documents, the attorney told her that your husband, he doesn't appear to be attempting to hide the property or cause damage by releasing the video, but he has filed for sole custody. This is the first time Linda has seen Molly and Jimmy in 8 weeks. They look refreshed and Molly seems older and more mature than Linda remembers, and neither Jimmy nor Molly acknowledges her existence. "I'm sorry, please don't hold a grudge forever. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but the idea of you despising me indefinitely is more than I can bear. I'd appreciate it very much if you could find a little bit of affection in your heart." When the issue of 100% custody came up, the judge hesitated, favoring the standard 50-50 arrangement, at which point Jimmy's attorney signaled to Molly, prompting the judge to say directly to her, "Before I made my final ruling, my client's daughter would like to have a brief conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you. My client's daughter would like to have a short conversation with you." The man in the video is my uncle, my father's brother, and this has been going on for 3 months, and if they don't get caught up in these words, it probably won't stop, and I'm going to award 100% custody to the father as requested, and he declared that as a result, the mother won't have to pay child support. These visits will include counseling sessions at the father's expense, which he can choose whether or not to attend, for the purpose of exploring the possibility of creating a relationship between mother and daughter that will benefit them in the future. Linda sobbed uncontrollably when she heard that the judge had ruled that Jimmy had full custody of Molly, but through her tears she still held a glimmer of hope that with the help of a psychologist she could begin to rebuild some kind of relationship with her daughter, and even with Jimmy. A year later, counseling between Linda and Molly was fruitful, with Linda gaining insight into her behavior and understanding why she made the choices she did. At the same time, Molly could relate to the pain that Linda had endured, perhaps even more so than Jimmy and herself, although this was not the same as forgiving or justifying her mother's behavior. Linda apologized repeatedly, but one day Molly urged her to forget about it, to leave it in the past and not bring it up again, she said, and Linda tried to find out from Molly any details about Jimmy, his appearance, his emotional state, or his level of happiness, and Molly sensed Linda's deep affection for him, but also understood that Jimmy did not want to trust or love her anymore. So instead of contributing to Linda's fixation on Jimmy, Molly encouraged her to explore a new life ways, including Jimmy's refusal of counseling, his reconciliation with his parents, and a deep bond with Amanda and her children. Linda left Dan and started her life over. Jimmy ignored any attempts by Dan or his parents to reconcile, and if Dan attended family gatherings, Jimmy avoided them. Last year, Jimmy prioritized his relationship with Molly and put his job on the back burner, giving up dating and avoiding social gatherings with friends. Molly encouraged him to embrace this new chapter in his life and to consider dating again because she sensed that he might be ready to get back into the dating scene. Linda acknowledges the serious consequences of her actions and realizes that it would be foolish to ignore them. She gave in to lust and the fleeting thrill of forbidden intimacy and lost the fulfilling life she once had.